Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to our panel discussion titled Cognitive Resilience Building Psychological Defense Against Cyber Attacks. Our moderator is Riz Khan, international journalist and TV host Al Arabiya English. Our panelists are Dr. Neal Jetton, Cybercrime Director, Interpol, Major General Retired Engineer Mohammad Boarki, Chairman, National Cybersecurity Center, NCSC, Kuwait, Dr. Mary Aiken, Chair and Professor of the Cyber Psychology Department, Capital Technology University, Chris Gibson, Executive Director, Forum of Incident Response and Security Teams, FIRST, Filippo Cassini, Senior VP of Engineering, Fortinet. Riz, over to you.
Thank you very much. Excellencies, distinguished ladies and gentlemen. Please, a round of applause for our panel as they joined us, and please grab your seats. Now, rapidly advancing technologies forces us to adopt new phrases all the time. We now need critical thinking when researching information on the internet. We need to avoid echo chambers and confirmation bias when consuming news. And as we continue to be bombarded by online scams, phishing, ghosting, FOMO, YOLO, and perhaps the most worrying, cyber attacks, we need cognitive resilience. That's why this next session explores cognitive resilience, building psychological defense against cyber attacks. So what are the risks to us as individuals and as society? Who should be protecting us? Is it governments, the big tech corporations, or are we left to defend for ourselves? And what should we know? What should we be doing? And how do we learn what to do? I don't know about you, but I need some cognitive resilience when I need to explore these ideas for the introduction. Now, to illustrate how challenging technology is, I'm going to tell you a brief story that dates back to the 1990s, when email was just becoming popular and search engines were just coming out as well. And there was a story of an elderly couple who lived in Boston, and they were going to celebrate their 50th wedding anniversary. And they decided to go back to Florida, where they had their wedding, after their wedding, they had their honeymoon. And they decided to go back to the same place after 50 years, same hotel, have some fun as a couple of 50 years of a wedding. Probably wasn't the wisest choice to marry in the summer because Florida is always very warm, but they said, we'll go back to Florida and we'll relax together on the beach. So the way it worked out, they had to get someone to look after their pet. The wife said, I'll sort that out. You go ahead to the husband, go to the hotel, book us the place, and we'll share our memories after 50 years. So the husband went down to Florida, and when he got there, he found that the hotel had been demolished, but another one with the same name was just in a different location. So he checked in, he got everything. The manager was very miserable. The manager of the hotel was really grumpy. So as he checked in, he decided, look, I know how to use email now, and my wife uses email. So he decided to send her an email. But he made one small mistake in that email, and the address was wrong. And it went to a woman in New York, a young woman who had just lost her husband in a fatal car accident. So this poor young woman opens the email, and she reads the subject line, "Hi, dear." And she's like looking at this, and it says, "I bet you're surprised to hear from me. I'm not where I thought I would be." And it's very hot here, and the guy in charge is really miserable. But everything is ready for your arrival in a couple of days. So needless to say, she fainted. So perhaps cognitive resilience helped a little bit there. Now, I want to see what we can learn from our experienced panel. You heard them as they were introduced, so I won't waste the short time we have with introductions, but I do want to start with questions straight away to our panelists. So I'm going to grab a seat, and perhaps I might start with Dr. Mary Aiken, because this subject of cyber psychology was something very new to me as I came to this forum, the idea that we need this. So Dr. Aiken, great to have you with us here. And I'll start by asking what this term cognitive resilience means, and I guess what are the most significant psychological vulnerabilities that individuals face when it comes to cyber attacks? How important is it for us to have that resilience so we can cope?
Well, cognitive resilience was conceptualized as, the resilience of the human versus a system. So we're all familiar with the construct of resilience in systems. If there's an attack, how quickly can the system recover? The problem for me as a cyber behavioral scientist is when we start talking about human cognitive resilience. The problem is we're not machines. And to try and overlay technological concepts onto humans, for me, in some ways is problematic. Also, when we think about an AI-driven attack, it's asymmetric. So for the human to be that line of defense against a machine attack is not really, it's not going to work. So I think that we can look at aspects of building resilience in humans. We talk about critical infrastructure. The human infrastructure is also a critical infrastructure. But I don't think that effectively it's going to form a line of defense. I think it's going to be a small part of an overarching defense system. And the point about resilience is that there are hereditary and genetic aspects to resilience. So if we want general population to be resilient, resilient works like this. If there are 4 people, 1 is going to be super resilient, 2 are going to be 50-50, and 1 is going to have 0 resilience. So effectively, we're talking about a Darwinian construct of survival of the tech fittest.
Oh, interesting.
And that's not acceptable.
I'm going to go into that in a minute because that's a fascinating concept, and perhaps a lot of people wouldn't have even thought at that level. Let's get into a few more questions on what's involved when it comes to cybersecurity and how it affects our cyber resilience, if we are still going to use that term. And perhaps I could bring in Dr. Neal Jetton, who's the Director of Cybercrime at Interpol. Now, you're getting to see and understand what are really most extremes when it comes to what's possible in terms of cyber attacks. How worried should we be?
Well, thank you very much first for the invitation and for having Interpol here. How worried should we be? Obviously, we have these forums, every year, so it is a big concern. It's a big concern for law enforcement. It's a concern for our national security agencies. To alleviate that concern, we just have to continue to move forward. For Interpol, I think our role is to serve as a point of contact for 196 different member countries, including those represented here. We serve as a sort of bridge between the different law enforcement agencies. We also bring in private sector partners. We think that power and knowledge is key. So as long as we are sharing that information between private sector, between policymakers, between other law enforcement agencies, I think we're making progress.
Well, Chris Gibson, when there is a major attack, you're one of the guys that gets called. Now, as someone who has to lead incident response teams, explain how those teams have to be mentally prepared to manage what would be the intense pressure that comes with managing a high-profile cyber attack.
Cool, thank you very much. Firstly, thank you very much for inviting me. It's a great conference, my 3rd time here. I enjoyed it every time. So I'll draw on my 2 experiences. I worked at a private sector, Citibank for 20 years, about 10 years of that in the incident response community. They're in a very different space. Very, we can't get hacked. Any hack is a bad thing. Then I moved from there into the public sector and worked for the UK government at building their national cert. That's a very different space with very different responsibilities and very different manning things. Citibank was a very diverse team. It was spread across the world. Cert UK was a very focused team in a single location. In terms of building those teams, though, the word is team. I think the important word we have to use, and we've talked about it's a team sport, but being an incident response team is a team sport as well. I had about 60 people. We worked very hard to bring all those people together as often as we could to make them into that team that knew each other, trusted each other, helped each other, were resilient, and helped each other become resilient. Everybody has a place to play in that. But then there's a significant amount of forward planning. Major catastrophe hits, everybody rushes to the office. That's not actually a very good idea because in 24 hours, you're going to have everybody is going to be exhausted. So we had plans in place that if such thing happened, we would send half the people home. We'd say, come back in tomorrow. We build that, try and make sure that we manage the tempo of the incident as best we can. Clearly, an incident drives itself, but we would try and make sure that we had the staffing in place at the right times, that we had the right resilience, that we had the right people, that we didn't end up with too many of incident responders and not enough PR people. Because managing that incident is a very, very holistic thing.
I'll get into some of that as well as we get on with the discussion. I'll bring in Major General Boarki here, please. Thank you for being with us, sir. Now, when it comes to cybersecurity, there's different elements. There's the private sector, there's government, there's individuals. when it comes to national security, what sort of strategies do governments have to adopt to build societal resistance so that the public can maintain some sort of security and some sense of psychological security during what might be a large-scale cyber attack?
First of all, thanks for having me here for the second time. And when it comes as a national threat, as national security, always national plans comes in place to be conducted. For example, we have to secure the critical infrastructure as a national approach. We have to secure the incident response team to build up a national incident response team with the recovery plan, always as a national approaches. And we can create a crisis management center which gather up all the critical infrastructure entities which will help to mitigate and to respond to such a cyber threat in a greater scale. And for example, if I can elaborate, in the last digital pandemic, if I can say, is the CrowdStrike, which has been affected most of the countries in the world. And the plan is to be ready as a proactive incident response and as an early warning to actually imagine that there is a global threat will be happening anytime, and we have so many examples happening in the world. So the key success is to respond for the national threat, is to build up a team which is rapidly will respond to any pandemic or any digital cyber attacks.
And so it's interesting because, of course, the CrowdStrike was not a malicious attack, and it just showed what vulnerabilities there were. It was a lesson.
Yeah, but as a pandemic, it's disabled all, let's say, services in country, which is, we consider it as it's after threat, which is the attackers will take advantage of those disabled systems. And this is what happened lately. After a few days, there is some report which eliminate that APTs, advanced persistent threats groups, that they took advantage from this vulnerability happened during the update thing, and they use it as a phishing attack for people.
That's frightening. Filippo Cassini, I want to bring you in, sir. And you know, we're also attached to our devices, our phones, our tablets, and these are always connected. These devices are always connected, and as a result, they're always vulnerable to cybersecurity breaches. So how can the telecommunications industry create solutions that protect individuals and I guess give us some relief from the psychological stress that both the operators and the individuals have, that there could be an attack any time?
Yeah, so first of all, thank you for having me here. I'm working for a vendor, so our focus is, of course, to provide technology that can enable better response in terms of cybersecurity. I think specific to devices and telecommunications, there's two particular aspects. So one is the consumer, the person that uses the device. For them, there has to be simple technologies that allows them to be aware and protected. And there is a lot of investment that I think has to be done on knowledge at the simple level of the normal operators, of the guy going to the hotel and stuff like that. So for that, we are also investing money into like free training, free awareness, knowing why people are looking for data, why me as a common end user, being no one special, can be still targeted by an attack. Because I think that can help a lot building resilience, like we mentioned before. The other part is the technology. So you've got a lot of it. You've got a lot of advancement. You've got a lot of different new things popping up every day. And I think for that, investments and building awareness and in general strength and efficiency. We talk about today a lot of machine learning, AI, these kind of technologies. I think the potential and the focus there is to increase the productivity from the security operator point of view, to be able to help proactive and effectively counter cyber attacks.
I've got to get back to Dr. Mary Aiken and ask about this. You've kind of put an interesting point out there, survival of the cyber fittest. The idea that it's not just such an easy equation. It's not just a level playing field when it comes to resilience, as you say. So that's a fascinating angle on this. And I wonder, considering we are not going to be free of our devices, certainly in the near future, if there is that diversity in the way people react in terms of their own genetic or natural resilience, what is the most effective strategy to educate individuals to the possible vulnerabilities they might face when it comes to a cyber attack, so that they can, at least, even those who have no natural advantage, might build some resilience?
I think it's very much dependent on the nature of the attack. So we can't talk about generic cyber attacks as if they're all the same thing. So educating people in terms of the response is actually entirely dependent on the nature of the attack. So if we think about specific cyber attacks, so say if it's a cyber fraud incident, well, the psychological response might be that you feel ashamed or guilty that you lost your money in terms of a transaction or an investment. If it was a ransomware attack, you might feel very frightened. You might be a little traumatized or PTSD as a result of the attack. If it's a sextortion attack, then you might feel guilt or shame. And if it's a massive attack on critical infrastructure, then general population might feel a sense of panic. You might have problems with social order, much in the same way as we had to navigate COVID and all the restrictions. So in terms of educating and in terms of building awareness and equipping and upskilling to respond, what you need to do is have educational protocols that actually consider the exploit in terms of the attack vector, and then an appropriate response, either not to become a victim of the attack or to cope with the psychological after effects following an event.
It's really interesting, this term attack vector just came into my vocabulary today after having a few conversations with people. It's quite terrifying. I was going to ask Dr. Jetton here about the role Interpol plays, because you're an international agency. You don't tell governments what to do, but you're a resource for governments, the private sector, and so on. So how do you encourage, perhaps, and educate or provide information that allows agencies and governments and companies to build contingency plans in the event of something major happening?
That's a great question. So Interpol isn't in the business of telling governments what to do, but we are in the business of helping the different law enforcements build up their cyber resiliency themselves. So what we want to do is put out the message from a lot of different platforms about how to protect yourself, how law enforcement can improve its abilities. Every year, Interpol produces 2 different threat assessments, one for the Africa region, one for the Asia and South Pacific region, where we go through and we actually ask the law enforcement from those areas, what are you seeing, how are you combating it, and then we put it out for public dissemination. And so hopefully governments are reading that and looking at that. We're also in other different forums. We're participants in the Counter Ransomware Initiative, which is occurring in Washington, D.C. this week. So we've just published a report working with our Australian counterparts on intervention methods through various stages of a cybercrime attack. And so we look at from a lot of different angles. And we also one of the big focuses that we look at is emerging technologies, AI. I know that's one of the buzzwords, obviously. And so from our hope is that law enforcement is being equally as driven to look at AI, not just concerns, but also strengths and ways that we can actually utilize AI for law enforcement. Interpol just published a toolkit for responsible AI innovation for law enforcement. So basically, we try to put out as many products as we can from a lot of different angles, knowing that there is no perfect strategy for combating cybercrime.
I'm just going to slip this in here because it occurred to me, every time I hear Interpol, I think of this kind of romantic agents in cafes having secret discussions like the CIA and MI6 and so on.
My son, when he heard that I was going to Interpol, thought I was going to be the next James Bond. And when I actually told him what I was doing and, mostly sitting behind a computer sending emails, he was less than impressed.
That's it. So I was going to say times have changed.
Right.
Chris Gibson, I was going to say one thing I think we've learned at the start of this conference, as Dr. Aiken pointed out, there are different levels of resilience, there are different levels of attacks and responses to those attacks, and it's quite a web rather than just a linear platform. So if there was a large-scale cyber attack, for example, what strategies do you think should be prioritized in order to give the public a sense of confidence and to reduce any fear as a result of that attack?
Gosh. So I think the challenge we face often is defining that word attack, really getting to the nuances of what that is. CrowdStrike affected millions of people globally. It wasn't an attack, but it affected them. It's an incident, no matter how it came in. The other thing that worries me when we use the term attack, and I think we use it very loosely, is that it catastrophizes the language. It makes people feel like everything is going to be the end of the world, everything is going to be a crisis. I cannot fix it because I'm a small cog in this machine. And I think, again, we all know that if people generally improved their cyber hygiene and so on, we'd actually be a lot more cyber resilient. Possibly not person, but cyber resilient. So back to the question of a major attack. Clearly, preparation is key. Clearly, having things in place, having protocols in place, such that you have this stuff planned out. You have a playbook. You have draft sort of texts, emails, however you're going to communicate, that are ready to go. Clearly, you'll change those depending on the circumstances, but this is not the moment to be reinventing the wheel. This is not the moment to be talking to news broadcasters and so on, explaining what your challenges are. You need to have done that up front. So preparation, absolutely part of the plan. Tabletop exercises, part of the plan. How are we going to respond? Who is going to respond? I've worked in places where the assumption is corporate communications will run the tweets. Clearly that's not going to work because they spend 3 months deciding whether to cross the T or put in an Oxford comma. You need someone who's very quick at this and very attuned and very in with the organization such that they know how to play this. So prep, having that in place and pushing that message. But then, single point of contact. You don't want multiple messages coming from different parts of the organization. You need to make sure you're telling your staff, you're telling your customers, you're telling the wider public the same story so that everybody feels involved, they understand your problem, but they understand that you're dealing with this with urgency, that you recognize and you empathize with the problems that you have caused, potentially, or has been caused, and that you're working with them to help provide, bring this situation back under control.
I want to get back to Major General Boarki, and traditionally, I guess, agencies, perhaps even governments, corporations, they tend to be competitive, whereas here, there needs to be some collaboration. So I wonder, what is the best way for collaboration, bringing together the government sectors, military institutions, with which you're, of course, very familiar, and the private sector, so that you can educate, prepare, and protect the public from cyber attacks?
Yes, I come from a military background, and my main strengthening points is building teams, and these teams to gather them up and to work as a one team. So I always say when I have the chance in any meeting, as a governmental meeting back home, is to raise this thing is with this cyber attacks cannot be mitigated or protected unless we gather up all together and collaborate. And if you, maybe psychologically, if you indicate that government entities, they are part of the equation to protect the infrastructure, they would do, a great performance in protection. So campaigns, national campaigns, drills, hackathons, all those kind of things, and also summits and conferences, and to let them know that they are responsible also in protecting infrastructures. It's not just the responsibility of NCSC, which is the National Cyber, it's the responsibility of everyone. And this is it's a successful approach. We have touched that if we engage people and let them know that they are part of this protection, they would do more than we expect, actually.
I think the more serious the threats, people will realize they have to collaborate as well. That's going to be a big factor. Filippo, let me get back to you, because as technology moves forward so rapidly, what role do you see AI and automation playing in reducing pressure and fatigue experienced by professionals who have to manage these high-stakes cyber attacks?
Yeah, I'd like to go back to the example of the 007 who's always at the keyboard.
Yeah.
Because I think this is kind of like one aspect of this. If you look at the dynamic of what's really happening in the background during an event of this kind, you have a lot of information to fetch, and you have a lot of information to analyze. And this information comes from sensors, which have been, think of it of sensors for different technologies, for different aspects, that have been deployed everywhere. So we've been sourcing, in other words, technologies that help us defend every single aspect of our digital life. So there's a lot of information coming up, and we need something to make sense of it. And in easy terms, that's what the potential for machine learning and AI to help us doing that. But the next challenge is, what are we going to do in terms of explaining what we want? So I think the next level is really to be able to know what I need to ask to the AI, and to be able to know what I need to do in order to most efficiently fetch that information that allows me to take that decision. Because that decision, at the end of the day, up to the level of the abstractions, it will be always made by humans.
That is, the human being the weakest link. I'm still stuck with this vision of 007 at a keyboard now. 007 assassinating is just now 007 deletes.
Yeah, it could be simply taking the decision at that point, and the rest going down will be automated, because that would be, that ideal moment when I have all control of all the technology and I'm able to fully automate my response, which is what 007 will decide.
So, Dr. Aiken, I'm going to essentially, I think, almost we're running out of time to give you the last word, because I think what you've done is kind of opened our eyes to the idea that there is a much broader learning curve for us here. So what are the resources? I mean, I know you want to comment on some of the points, but what are the resources people can use now to more individualize what it takes to get the right resilience?
I think the first thing is that we have to understand what's happening. And with all due respect, Chris, I strongly disagree with your minimization of attacks on humans. If you're in your home and somebody breaks in and hits you with a stick and goes up to your bedroom and takes the $500,000 that you have under your mattress, we consider that to be an attack, not an incident. If somebody targets you online and engages you in a cyber fraud, social engineering event, it's not an incident, it's an attack. You could lose your life savings, and that is catastrophic for the individual. It may not be catastrophic for a bank, but we're talking about humans. And what we have to do is stop minimizing the impact on humans, on us, on our families, and on our children, and think about these problems at a human level. And that's why we need cyber psychology. That's why we need to factor the human into the cyber equation and think about attacks on individuals and on society.
All right. Well, I'm wondering, with $500,000 under your mattress, how high your mattress is. Ladies and gentlemen, a wonderful round of applause, please, for our panel. As always, so many questions, never enough time. Thank you. I hope you enjoyed the session. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.